and thanks for joining us this week on Agenda 2030. I am Toyin Nkamiang John. The United Nations Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, Mr. Edward Kallon, recently spoke to the Agenda 2030 team of the various interventions of the UN system to support Nigeria's effort to achieve sustainable development and the overall goal of the 2030 agenda of leaving no one behind. He also gave his views on progress being made by Nigeria in efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. We will bring you excerpts from the exclusive interview in this edition of Agenda 2030. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
We have with us here the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, and he will be speaking to us about the recent reforms in the United Nations system in Nigeria, and also the efforts of the UN to help Nigeria achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. So could you just quickly take us through what has been your experience as the resident coordinator in Nigeria, considering the fact that only very recently you moved back into the United Nations House in Nigeria after that unfortunate incident? First of all, maybe I should even say congratulations on relocation. So what has been your experience since you came back?
It has been a very fulfilling experience. I must start by stating that, having the opportunity to be in this great nation, trying to contribute to the development aspiration of a giant like Nigeria in the sub-region. So it has been quite fulfilling from that perspective. The job is very interesting. As a UN resident coordinator and representative of the Secretary General, I have this very interesting task of trying to work with my colleagues and also try to coordinate the work of the UN agencies to add value to the effort of the government of Nigeria in finding solutions to their immediate development challenges in the country. We are here today in the UN House, an investment by the government of Nigeria, the first of its kind in the sub-region, and an iconic infrastructure that I can only describe as one that sets pace and brings hope to humanity. Because when we reflect at what my colleagues went through in this building during the last bombing, it is quite tragic. But also there is hope. Today we are here again with one strong spirit that we are here to work and to help the voiceless and also contribute to addressing the vulnerabilities of people of this country.
Okay, only very recently, precisely January this year, came into effect the restructuring in the United Nations with regards to the operations of the activities in Nigeria. Would you want to share with us how important this is, particularly with its linkages with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, in May last year, the General Assembly adopted a resolution to try to work towards reforming the UN development system. This was part of the reform agenda of the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, to try to make the UN more effective, more focused, and contribute to governments in their development aspirations. So on the 1st of January, the reform came into full effect. The reform brought in some dramatic and interesting changes and expectations from the UN family in a country like Nigeria. It is a reform that is calling on the UN agencies in Nigeria to pull together their synergies and comparative advantages to support the government better in the fight to ensure that the development needs of its people are met. It resulted in quite substantial changes in my responsibility as the UN resident coordinator. Before the reform, I was the UN resident coordinator and the UNDP resident representative. But with the reform and with the implementation of the reform in January 2019, these functions were linked. So now my core focus is to coordinate the response of the United Nations in the country in general, which means trying to coordinate activities impartially and independently. Because before the reform, I was also the UNDP resident representative. So that the impartiality in my function is one of the key changes that the reform brought about. The reform also refocused my responsibilities in the country. As a representative of the Secretary General, the reform called on me to lead the work of the UN development systems in Nigeria in support of government's priority. A core focus of that responsibility is to support the government to implement Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals with a focus on eradicating poverty in all its forms and leaving no one behind. This is a mammoth task, taking into consideration the development transition that the country is going through as we speak. So it is an opportunity where I am called upon to innovatively lead the UN presence in the country and to also ensure that the comparative advantages of the various UN agencies are used to support the government's effort. And it is also interesting in the sense that the innovative part that this revised responsibility calls for is so critical in helping governments realize their development objectives. So what we are seeing here is reforming to support governments better, reforming to support governments to implement the Sustainable Development Goals.
So would you say there have been some gains with regards to within the last few months having put this in place? What has been the response, first of all, from your colleagues concerning the fact that now you are no longer biased with regards to the UNDP, which used to be the resident representative? What has been the response from your colleagues?
They all feel relieved from some of the discussions I've been having with some of them. And they are now reasonably convinced that in my role as resident coordinator, I'm expected to treat all agencies fairly and to work in the common interest of the UN system in the country. But of course, you know, change has its own liabilities. And you know that change is not one of the easiest things that people adapt to. Yeah. But I am convinced that this new reorganization will help pull us together better and will help us work together collectively.
You have 5 priorities areas for Nigeria with this reform, like I stated in one of your speech that you gave, maybe you addressed to your partners and colleagues. Why these 5 key priorities here?
The 5 key priorities are priorities that were designed and developed by us to enable us to start harvesting the quick wins of the reform. I mean, you've read the article. The 5 priorities included 1, trying to get the system to work together as collectively to support government in the implementation of SDGs. For us to do this amicably, we need to be innovative. We need to change the way we have been doing business. So you find out that the second key focus is trying to move away from business as usual to what we are calling business unusual, but more or less trying to think out of the box and coming up with solutions, especially development solutions, to address the challenges, development challenges the country is facing currently. The third element of the reform is partnerships. We have to relook at partnership in a more strategic manner. We have to reinforce engagement with government, civil society, the private sector. And we also have to ensure that we promote North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation and create platforms that the government of Nigeria can leverage to address their development challenges. The fourth priority is looking at peace, security, and prevention. I mean, you're all aware that, as we say in our local parlance in the West Coast, prevention is better than cure.
Very well.
Yeah, so we quite believe in the fact that if we can prevent conflicts, I think it's more durable than waiting to address the outcomes of conflicts, which these days are very costly from our perspective. So peace, security, and conflict prevention is quite a third focus, a third pillar in our reform agenda in Nigeria. The fifth is what we call coherence and coordination. That is trying to get the system, the UN country team, to work more coherently together and be able to coordinate and collaborate better.
Your Excellency, sir, you've been supportive of the implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria since Nigeria signed on to the pact in 2015. How well will you say we are doing in the road to the 2030 agenda, sir?
Yeah, and Nigeria has taken some big strides in implementing the SDGs, which is worth noting. I mean, besides being one of the first countries that work on the National Voluntary Report, it has taken some strategic steps in trying to facilitate coordination of the SDGs with the various line ministries. I think the first strategic focus of the government, which is adding value, was the establishment or the appointment of a senior special assistant to the president on sustainable development goals. That function has helped to streamline the vertical and horizontal linkages that are required to coordinate implementation of the SDGs between various line ministries that are more or less the implementation wing of the government. I have also seen a major progress in developing partnerships. I mean, I've been part of the functions where the memorandum of understanding was signed with the donors, memorandum of understanding with the private sector, memorandum of understanding with civil society, etc. All these partnership arrangements are gearing towards creating a platform that will facilitate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are also ongoing remarkable programs that are worth mentioning. The Empower program, that is empowering youth as we speak. We have the school feeding program that is also reaching out to many children out. And then you also have a lot of conditional grant transfers that are helping address vulnerability. I think these are some of the social investment that are paying off. Now, when we talk about the SDGs, there is one reality we always have to appreciate. We talk about 17 goals. These goals are universal and they are interlinked. But there is one unique reality that we must address in supporting governments to implement the SDGs. SDG 1 to 6 is talking about social investment, and SDG 7 to 15 is talking about macroeconomic investment. In an economy like Nigeria, a lower middle income country, the only durable way of addressing social investment is also by stimulating economic growth. And that is why SDG 7 to 15 is extremely critical in enhancing social investment in Nigeria. I don't think grants are going to be able to solve this problem without a major leap in economic development. So that is one reality that is quite obvious. You know. And I also believe that there are several innovative financial instruments that the Nigerian government can leverage in trying to increase or accelerate implementation of the SDGs. We're talking about innovative financial instrument like the green bond that has been launched by the government of Nigeria, which is the first sovereign green bond of this country in 2017. We also have innovative financing frameworks like social impact bonds, development impact bonds, public-private partnerships that are all critical in accelerating implementation of the SDGs. My call is to try to look for those quick wins that are critical in the 6 geopolitical zones to start implementing the SDGs, nurturing the human capital development needs of this country to complement the ongoing infrastructure drive. It is critical that both has to go together, not necessarily prioritizing one against another. So while there is a need for infrastructure development in the country, there is also need for investment in human development. and the human capital development does remain the fine thread that will weave together the future opportunities of this country.
As you go around the country, sir, trying to, on advocacy around, trying to get the government at some other levels to buy into SDGs, are you impressed with their responses, the mainstreaming effort, to the national plan? Are you impressed with how they are responding to advocacy, and do you think there is enough buying at some national levels now?
There is an increased awareness on the needs to mainstream SDGs into national and state plans. I think this is a starting point. I mean, to be evaluative, I mean, the progress has started, but it's not at the level that we expect. We still expect states to ensure that their state plans are informed by SDGs, that various practical measures are put in place to ensure transparency and accountability in implementing national state plans, and also ensuring that there is enough data to demonstrate the differences that these adjustments are making. I'm a firm believer that that integrating the SDGs into state plans is a starting point to be transformative. And I expect leadership at the state level to be transformative in their approaches so that they can cater for the needs of their people. So, I mean, there is progress, but there is still more to be done.
Okay, as the humanitarian coordinator of the United Nations in Nigeria, what would be your recipe? Because there's so much challenge with regards to the crisis in the Northeast and some other parts of the country. And that is a very huge blow with regards to where we're going to implement the SDGs. What would be your recipe to arrest this?
The crisis in Northeast Nigeria has resulted in the displacement of over 1.7 million people. Humanitarian assistance is not the longer-term solution to the crisis in Northeast. It is critical that people return back to their homes and start rebuilding their lives. That is why we are now proposing a holistic approach that looks at the short-term life-saving needs, but also look at those early recovery and development needs that are very critical. We as the humanitarian and development community are pursuing a two-track approach, critical two-track approach. One of that is to save lives, but we are trying to do this sensibly. What I mean by trying to do this sensibly is trying to build it around a resilience-based approach. With this approach, we can help the communities to cope with the impact of the crisis, recover from this crisis, and also engage in transformative change that is required in rebuilding their life. But we are also very clear that the root causes of this crisis in Northeast Nigeria is due to development deficit, is due to poverty that is now multidimensional from our perspective, and has to do with both governance and human rights deficit that is compounded by climate vulnerabilities. So therefore, look, in the search for a durable solution will require an investment in both areas, both the short term and the long term. And closely linked to that is the search of a durable solution to the conflict itself, which calls for a political process that will look at issues of conflict resolution, reconciliation, return and reintegration of displaced persons.
So how far will you say the humanitarian response plans that may be presented as helped in overcoming some of these challenges that you have identified?
Yeah, in 2017, the humanitarian community mobilized over $945 million. And those resources were used to provide humanitarian assistance to 5.6 million people. These included assistance with food, water, sanitation, health, and some livelihood recovery. We were also able to contain serious cholera outbreaks that were very, very critical in saving lives. So in 2016, the humanitarian community reached 5.6 million. In 2017. In 2018, we are also able to reach 5.5 million people with humanitarian assistance and mobilize $877 million. So it has been quite successful. The response has been quite successful from that perspective. And this, in addition to what the government is bringing in, has helped us to prevent a famine in northeast Nigeria, and has also helped us to start supporting communities, bringing hope to people that have been displaced by this conflict. We are also working in a very diverse context. We have 1.6 million people who are returning home or are returning very close to home. My biggest challenge now is to have the international community to support this crisis and to provide resources so that people can go back to their homes in safe areas to start rebuilding their lives. And I think that is the durable solution. The only solution to the crisis in northeast Nigeria is peace. So therefore, all efforts are required to ensure a peaceful resolution of this conflict.
Yeah, the crisis, like you said, the solution is peace, and there's this belief that we need to tackle the crisis around the border area. Maybe the other countries within that very area come in, cooperate fully with all of this. Do you think this is actually being taken seriously?
It has to be taken seriously because the crisis is a regional one. Yeah. You're talking about the Lake Chad Basin. And the current state of the Lake Chad Basin is part of the contributing factors to the conflict, where livelihood have been disordered, have been altered completely, and people have to move from their homes in search of safe haven. And the non-state armed groups that are operating in this area are operating across the borders. So therefore, a regional approach is critical in finding a solution to the conflict.
Sir, one of your responses was when you rebuild the whole community, I think it's an Ingwam community in Borno State, when you try to resettle them and provide accommodation and everything. How many of that can the UN really do in the Northeast?
The UN job is catalytic. I mean, it's there to support the effort of the government. I mean, we cannot rebuild Northeast Nigeria. I mean, we can support the government in rebuilding Northeast Nigeria. So at times I don't really want to look at this issue as one that can be done by external actors. It is the responsibility of the government, but we should be there to support that effort, you know, in rebuilding lives and livelihoods.
Yeah, I think Nigerians want to applaud your effort, particularly with trying to mobilize about $1 billion last year for some of this your intervention or humanitarian intervention, and this year you are looking a little below that same amount in your effort. And I just want to appreciate you in this. How far would you say this has gone? Because a whole lot needs to be done, like you have rightly pointed. How far would you say this has gone in terms of touching the lives of those people in those areas?
We have supported the government in saving lives, no doubt about it. And without the support, and together with the government, we would have been talking about a serious human crisis. But we have been able to avert it. Yeah? And I think that is one of the things we need to we need to actually talk about. At times we are very critical with ourselves. We say we have not done much, but we need to do more. But I think there has been a marked progress in that regard, where we have been able to work with the government to save lives in the short term. There is also massive investment by the government, I mean, to try to find a solution to this crisis. The military investment is enormous. I mean, both by the Nigerian Army and the Multinational Joint Task Force, which the Nigerian government is also supporting, and in a very, very big way. So, I mean, we can say that a lot has been done, but more needs to be done. And that's why I keep repeating that peace is the only solution to this conflict.
The radicalization of the minds of the youth is also seen as one of the ways to go in addressing this issue. To what extent have you also been supporting this?
De-radicalization is critical, but I also think that creating alternative livelihoods is also critical in the process of de-radicalization. And I think what we need to do in Northeast is to create opportunities for the youths. If we create opportunities for the youths and we create alternative livelihoods, we can address the issues of de-radicalization. I don't believe that the crisis is one that cannot be resolved. If there is one crisis in the world that we can actually find solutions to, is the crisis in Northeast Nigeria. It is still not polarized, as other conflicts I've been able to see in my life, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, in Somalia, to name a few. So it can be resolved. There is a solution, but it requires investment, and it requires development investment, and it requires creating alternative livelihoods for people. They have to see other choices of life. The youths have to be created, youths have to be given the opportunity for an alternative livelihood to make choices, and hopefully better choices.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been an awesome time having you on our set today on Agenda 2030. And that has been the UN Resident Coordinator in Nigeria. He's been speaking about the efforts to help resolve some of the humanitarian challenges, as well as meet the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's been an awesome time with you, sir, and thank you for hosting us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that's our package. Remember, you can always watch this program and other episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channels on youtube.com/FreshNewsTV and youtube.com/Agenda2030TV. You can also watch the program live on Facebook. Just log on to www.facebook.com/FreshNewsNG and www.facebook.com/Agenda2030TV. Follow us on all our social media platforms at Agenda2030TV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Remember to drop your comments and share with your contacts. Do use the hashtag Agenda2030 and hashtag Agenda2030TV. Thank you for being part of this week's episode. I am Toyin Nkamiang John. See you again next week. Bye.